Hey y'all, I'm Dr. Miranda Ferguson with Stepping Forward Ministries and Southern Soul Chats. Today we're continuing our Driven to Distraction series with an episode titled Checking Your Balance. We're talking about money, not just managing it, but really digging into how it shapes our hearts, shifts our trust in God, and affects our ability to live out His call to love others. We know that money can be uncomfortable and often a challenging topic to address. In Matthew 6:21, Jesus reminds us, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's why it's so important to reflect on how wealth influences our lives and our relationship with God. We are thrilled to be joined by Pastor Christian Miller, a seasoned pastor with a deep understanding of how matters of the heart, like money, intersect with our faith and distract us. Today, we hope to provide insight into why money conversations can feel so uncomfortable and offer practical steps to begin breaking free from its hold over us. Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are talking about money. Yes, money. And our episode title is Checking Your Balance. Now, I am so excited to have someone who has a lot of experience about talking about money and does it so well. Let me introduce you to Christian Miller. Hey, Christian.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, super excited and honored that you'd invite me on. And I'm excited about this topic, weirdly, because it is something that actually all of us have opinions about.
We do, and normally not a good one sometimes.
Yeah, but about me, so I work at the Met Church. I'm on staff there as a pastor. I've been on staff. This is my 12th year now on staff.
12 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I had a whole corporate career before that, and God really put a really overt, radical call on my life to dedicate my life to vocational ministry. And
Wow.
And even that in itself was an act of, honestly, generosity, as far as like my wife and I, even in that moment, was like, I don't know how financially this is going to work.
Does anybody who ever goes in ministry ever go,
Right.
We got this financially?
Yeah, we're going to bankroll.
That's right. We're buying big houses and cars. Let's go.
Yeah. But even our own journey with that of stepping out in faith was part of our God just working in our own hearts and minds, even on this topic. And so being on staff and even for a season as kind of overseeing the finances of the church. So in those 12 years, I've had many, many different roles. One of them being one of the pastors of finance, and God really taught me a lot about what His economy for generosity really looks like, because overseeing the finances of a church is way different than overseeing personal finances.
I bet it is.
So,
I can imagine.
Yeah. And even, our former pastor, Matt Robertson, was really great of talking about what true generosity really looks like. And so I'm super excited about really talking about the principles of biblical generosity, and then really, God is going to do what God does in the heart of everybody when it comes to where they are and I like to use the word generosity and not just giving, right? Because generosity is so much bigger than just giving money.
Something you have to do.
Right. And it's something you have to do, or even it's really, at the end of the day, it's not about the doing of giving, it's your heart posture with God.
I love that. And that's kind of where the Check Your Balance came from, the title, because you remember back in the day when you had a checkbook and you had to like write how much money you spent at each place and then balance your checkbook.
Yeah.
See, that shows my age because that's how I was taught to bank.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we're not talking about so much checking our balance with our bank account, but our priorities.
Yeah.
And I think money is really up there in the top when we talk about priorities. So it's going to challenge our listeners today to evaluate whether their focus is on worldly wealth or their relationship with God. So we're going to be making them check their balance.
That's awesome.
Which takes us into why we're here, right? So it's the problem. What is the problem? Well, this week, our problem is how money distracts us from God. So I went in and found a statistic from Bankrate. So this is from 2023, so really not that old.
Yeah.
I'd say you could still count it. And it says that 55% of Americans report that they are more focused on building wealth than they are on building relationships or other personal values. This highlights a trend where the pursuit of financial success often takes precedence over the things that matter most, like personal relationships, spiritual matters, spiritual growth, or just emotional well-being. But Christian, this is not just a worldly perspective problem.
Yeah,
It's not.
right.
It's also a problem in the church.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, the same statistics hold true in the church. And what's funny is when you look at statistics, people think they give more than they give, which is weird, right? Like you ask them, well, how much do you give? And they'll say a certain percentage. And then, so there's been studies where they've asked people, how much do you give to the church? And they'll say a number. And when they go back and actually look at their bank account, it's actually way less
Than what they think.
They give.
Wow.
Yeah.
and you're like, okay. So it's crazy because I guess there's this thought that you think that Christians, this would be easy.
Yeah.
That you would just understand it. You would know what God says about it, and it would just flow freely. I don't think it does.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll say that I'm not trying to jab at anybody, but I was telling you, tithing in church for me was something that I was raised and told why I should do it. It wasn't just you do it because you do it.
Yeah.
Like the concept was there, the understanding, but because I was raised the way I was, like in a single household, and things were always tight and always had enough. It's not that we had a dire situation, but I just grew up with a mom who could make a penny stretch for 4 runs to the grocery store. And that really just became embedded in me, whether I knew it or not. And so I also became a single parent. And so it would be like tithe was not at the top of the list, because what if I did that and then I couldn't feed my kid in this, right? Yeah. But it once I got in the routine of not doing it, it became really easy to just always be like, I can't. But then, I would go through that spiritual wave of something happening in my life and getting back in church, and I'm like, I'm going to tithe. Yeah. And I would see God do amazing things. Yeah. And every bill would be paid, but then something would happen and I'd fall off the wagon of tithing again. Yeah. And I was telling you this, and it's not to brag, it's just that showing faithfulness of God, we are 8 years of tithing.
That's amazing.
And I'm not going to say there's some months where things come up and I immediately go,
the thought hits your mind,
well,
right?
if I took these 4 weeks, it would cover it. Yeah. And I have to really be like, oh no. Yeah. No.
Yeah. Well,
stop that.
I think you're highlighting a really big struggle that people have. Like, money is tight for a lot of people. Yeah. And there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense not to be generous.
Yeah.
Because those are real problems. Like single moms, that's a big financial struggle. And, I think that you compound that with, then you look historically at all the church misappropriates money. Right. And so then there's also then they're going to use it to go do whatever. Yeah. And so I don't see it going to ministry. And so you have all these reasons why giving isn't the top priority. Yeah. And and it's a real struggle. And I think at the end of the day, I think you hit on something around seeing God move in your generosity. That's the key to it in my mind, is when I can give and I can be faithful even when it doesn't make sense, and then I can watch God move in that, it begins to shift our heart towards the things of God. Yeah. And generosity becomes a little bit more natural. It's an incremental shift. It doesn't happen overnight either, right? Yeah.
It does not happen overnight at all. And it's funny because Jeremy, when we were dating, and again, I was raised in church, just every time the doors open, and he was getting back into church at that time. And I remember he asked me about tithing, while we were dating, he point blank.
Wow, that's bold.
As we were having conversations of marriage, I don't know. But he asked me how I felt about it. And I was like, well, how do you feel about it? Because that's smart, right? And he's like, well, I totally think it's something that should be done. And I was like, well, here's my thing is like right now, if I barely have enough to pay my bills, it's God saying that if I don't do 10%, and he just stopped me. And he was like, I think you have to start somewhere.
That's right.
He's like, why are you so hung up on 10%? I was like, because that's what I've always been told.
That's a great question. Yeah.
I was like, that's what I've always been told. It's 10%. And he's like, so it's do or die? And I was like, well, I didn't know there was an option. And he was like, well, it's not an option. Like you get to have the 5% plan. He's like, but if you start somewhere and you're faithful with that and you see what God does, then you have to consistently go, okay, I'm going to go up more. And it makes me think of Donnie and Heather Mosher in the story they told at the Met when they double tithed by accident. But then they realized that because they weren't doing 10%, they were trying to incrementally, but then they double tithed and they didn't even miss it.
Exactly.
And they were like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people get hung up on the law of it.
Yeah. Man, he was dropping some truth bombs on you.
I know. And we still got married.
Yeah. But I think, I think there's so much to what he was saying. And part of that is, what does the Bible actually say about giving?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and that's where oftentimes people think it says something that maybe it actually doesn't.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole other kind of conversation of, we all want to, if we're followers of Jesus and we have a heart to be obedient, we want to be obedient to what he says, even about something like giving.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, like Jesus actually, it never came out of his mouth that you have to tithe, that you have to give 10%. Right. Right. And so Jesus was way more interested in your heart's posture about giving, right? And making it who you are as almost an offering and a worship back to him because of all the things that he's done in your life. And so, that's a whole nother kind of conversation about, I think people misunderstand, like tithing is an amazing benchmark. And I think it's like awesome because, it really does move the needle even in God's kingdom as far as fun. Because if everybody in the church tithed and gave 10%, no church would ever have a money problem.
Right.
I mean, the fact of the matter is so few people actually do that. Yeah. And so then the church, it seems like they're begging for money, but it's like, but I don't think honestly that the church talks about giving in a way that inspires people towards progress in that area versus convicting people about what they're not doing. Yeah.
Here's what it says and you're not doing it. Well, and like you said, Jesus knew this was going to be an issue. In this book that you and I both were talking about, The Treasure Principle by Randy Alcorn. Oh, it's such a good book. He notes that 15% of everything Christ said relates to this topic. And that it's even more than his teachings on heaven or hell.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? And it says, and so I was like, okay, well then what was the percent? Because Jesus is not speaking through the whole Bible. So what is the percent that he talked? And it said that his speaking was like 15% of the Bible. So that means that 5 to 10% of the 15% was on this topic because I believe like you said, it's a heart condition. Yeah. And he knew that it was going to be important. And interestingly enough, this book goes on to explain and break down lots of parables about money, pointing back to his thought that there is a fundamental connection between our spiritual lives and our money.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so I've heard you preach so many times on this connection and the distractions that it causes in our lives. Yeah. And you have to keep preaching about it because it's still a problem.
Sure, right, yeah.
Which means that it's not that it's the church's problem, right? It's not the church is after anybody for money because that's not what this whole discussion about. It's about the church. It's just that we see it there more active as a problem because of, as Christians, what we're called to do.
Yeah, and you have to ask the question, why did Jesus talk about this topic so much?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we know it wasn't because he actually cared about the dollars and the cents, right? He actually cared about, because it affects our relationship with him.
Yeah.
It really does, because it pulls our hearts in an opposite direction. Like it either pulls us towards Jesus or away from Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? And so that book is great because it talks about where our heart's posture is. And the whole idea of treasure principle is a treasure is what you hold valuable.
Yep.
Right. And so what do we look at our money as the most valuable thing, or do we look at our relationship with Jesus as more valuable? And it's a great perspective shift on like, where do we truly find value? Because when we put our faith and our trust and our value in money, I think what it does is it introduces this idea of a scarcity mindset, right?
Yeah.
Because we never have enough.
No, ever,
right?
Yeah.
Like you can ask some of the richest people in the world, like you take all the people that are super wealthy in the world. Well, why are they still working? They have plenty of money.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's just because they want to build wealth, right? And they want to have
They
influence.
want to continue to have more money.
Right. And I think it's super interesting to really, when you look at a perspective shift of, you mentioned our heart is always like attached to our money. And that's because what I find for myself, I use an I statement, is when I view money as my source of provision instead of the Lord as my source of provision, I'm always going to feel like I don't have enough.
So true. It's so true, which lets the church off the hook from here on out, I promise you guys. Because really what we're going into is saying what is talked about in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve money and serve God.
Yeah.
And that's what Jesus was trying to portray through all these stories.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's one of my favorite passage of scripture around this idea of generosity, not just giving, but just being generous. It comes out of 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. And Paul's talking to the Corinthian church, and he's basically holding their feet to the fire about giving. They had promised they were going to give to the Jerusalem church. And they made all these promises like, yep, we're going to help you. And then they didn't. Right. And so he's going back and saying, hey guys, what's the deal here? He was like, and he even uses the Macedonian church, who is under heavy persecution. They can't rub two nickels together, and yet they're giving and they're fulfilling their promise. And he's like, look at the Macedonian church. That's generosity.
Yeah.
Right. Their hearts are in the right place. And there's so many principles, but one of the things he talks about, he uses this phrase in the English that translates in English around rich generosity. And he says this over and over again in this passage. And when you look at the Greek translation, it's really this idea of being single-hearted and not double-minded, right? And I think that's the key around for us is how do we, in a world that is really wants to pull our heartstring away from the Lord. He's like, are you going to live in both worlds? Are you going to find your provision in temporal things, or are you going to find that's being double-minded? And he was like, this idea of being rich in generosity means you're pulling together, right, your faith and your actual like temporal circumstances from a generosity perspective. And I think that's where the idea of you can't serve two masters. Right. Because
it makes sense.
Right.
If you're single-hearted,
right,
to be double-hearted would have two things that are dwelling within your heart,
exactly.
Right? I'm not off base here.
Yeah. And so that's why that when you look at the verse that you quoted in Matthew, it aligns with that, right? And it's not just about generosity, it's in a whole different other aspects of our lives of God really calls us to be single-hearted in a lot of different ways, because we have one foot in the world and one foot with the Lord in a lot of ways, and generosity is definitely one of those.
Absolutely. And again, we see this throughout Scripture, like the stories of the rich young ruler, the hidden treasure, the pearl. There's several, again, 5 to 10%, right? Yeah. But these all point to the same truth that earthly treasures are not inherently bad.
Yeah.
But it's how we handle it, and it's where we place it in our hearts that makes the difference. And as you said, this is a heart condition. And so I want to say this one more time. Money itself is not a problem. The verse that I always hear that gets all jacked up is 1 Timothy 6:10. Money is the root of all evil. No, money does not have a way to function to be all evil. It's the love of the money. Exactly. It's what you do with those resources that can make money be for the good and the benefiting and the ongoing,
100%.
or it can wreck you and trash you and tear you down.
That's exactly right.
So we have to keep in mind that wealth, I don't even mean like, Jeff Bezos kind of wealth.
Right.
I just mean, having resources, having money is fleeting, it's temporary, and it is unable to satisfy our deepest needs. And I think we see that a lot when we see all these images on TV and social media of all these people who, like you were talking about, they have tons of money, but they're not happy.
Yeah.
10 cars isn't enough. We need 12. 4 houses isn't enough. We need 6.
That's right.
And Proverbs 23:5 reminds us, cast but a glance at riches and they are gone. For they will surely sprout wings and fly off to the sky like an eagle.
Yeah.
And all I can see is a dollar bill flapping some wings, because that's the truth.
Yeah.
You're not going to just hold it, dig a hole and bury it. I mean, money's leaving one way or another.
Yeah. Well, and
Period.
Matthew 6 says the same thing, right? Don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust will destroy. It's the same principle, right? It's store up for yourselves treasures in heaven.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing when you look at the last part of that is because, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And I think you're hitting on, when we give ourselves in our heart's posture towards our money, right? And like we've been saying over and over again, and that's part of what I love about this book is one of the main things that it talks about is this idea of ownership. Mm-hmm. Like somehow we bought into the lie that we are like owners of the things that we have.
I know I had.
Yeah, and
Yes.
and it lends itself to this idea of entitlement.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to be able to, when we don't have an ownership mindset, but we have a stewardship mindset, like everything we have comes from the Lord.
Yep.
And he expects us to steward it well.
Yep.
Right. Obviously, he gives us the things we have to meet our needs. Right. But are we stewarding it well? Just like we expect the church to steward well, we have to steward well individually.
Isn't it funny how we expect everybody else to steward well, but like we get a pass?
Yeah.
But not me. That didn't apply to me.
Yeah. But I think when we take that mindset, it shifts from having an entitled mindset to an entrusted mindset. Like we've been entrusted with these things, right? And God expects us to use them for his good and his glory. And so it really helps to really shift that mindset.
Yeah, it's a false sense of security, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I remember it's been 2 years now when God drastically changed my life and going into ministry. I was fortunate enough at that time, you guys had the pastoral training.
Yeah.
And I was able to get in on the last semester. And what was so good for me is that the semester I came into, it was really the semester that was more foundational. And it was in that time and the things that were being taught and the program we were going through. And it was during the revival series at the Met, because we had Wednesday night prayer time that God really during that class and was really shaping. And that was the portion, to put some background behind it, that was the portion where you're really moving through what does it look like to be a minister? Like what the Bible says, and here's all the things. And God really put it on my heart that all these things I had, that they didn't belong to me. Like he gave me a real big check your balance. My house, not your own. You open your house to things, invite people in. Your kids, you love them, but actually they're mine. And if I take one, that's my problem.
Wow.
And I started the whole concept of laying everything on the altar. He's given me this, but he asked me to give it back to him. He gave me my kids, but ultimately my mindset has to be that they belong to him.
Absolutely.
And it went down to everything I owned. He went through every single thing.
Wow.
And so what happened is there was conversations with my neighbors in the months to come that I didn't know where they were struggling. And I would have to go back and be like, let me tell you about the time I went to the Met and sat at the stage and just sobbed for hours, having to tell him how sorry I was for taking ownership of nothing that I ever owned.
Wow.
And how I sat there and one thing at a time at the altar of the church, used my hand to just lay it down. You can have them back and you can have this back. You can take it all. As long as I have you. It's all yours anyway. It's just on loan.
Wow.
And I've shared that story so many times and just from a real place of not, like you said, not a lecture kind of thing, but God showed me that I have to live my life that nothing is mine.
That's amazing. What a testimony.
And so it changes. It changes everything when you look at things and problems arise and money stuff comes up that like, it's not mine anyway.
I think you're hitting on what I mentioned earlier around generosity is so much bigger than just money. Like you're talking about this idea of I'm stewarding everything. Everything, and the Bible even says the earth and everything in it is the Lord's.
Yep.
Like when you look at everything,
Yep.
Your kids are in the earth. They're the Lord's. Like to your point, like your house, everything.
Even my silly plants. I have plants out here that I can finally grow after years of not. Yeah. And there was a point where we talked about moving our houses or whatever. And it was so silly in that season that I was like, well, we would have to take those plants with us. And even God convicted me on my plants. Those are my plants. Do you understand that nothing is yours? Not your flowers, not your grass, not your trees. Like, it's kind of like Job. Were you on the earth?
Yeah, exactly.
When I put the stars in place.
Let's set some perspective
I'm
here,
like,
right?
oh, yeah, no.
Yeah.
That wasn't here, Lord. I'm so sorry.
That is, wow. And that's amazing that the Lord convicted you about that. I mean, it probably did a fundamental shift in your brain,
huge.
Right?
It was huge because, again, I mean, I love my kids. I love my husband. I love my house. But I loved it for me.
Yeah.
And what it did for me and how it set aside me. And not that I'm saying that because I know somebody would be like, I cannot believe you're talking about your kids. And what if something happened to them? If something happens to them, it would be devastating.
Right.
I'm not saying we wouldn't mourn.
Right.
If my house burned down tomorrow, I'm not saying I wouldn't be upset. What I'm saying is I have to understand that all things are a gift and that I have to believe that God works within his gifts and for the good, no matter what they are.
Yeah.
If my truck blows up in the driveway tomorrow, I'm not going to be happy about it, but I have to step back and go, okay, on an earthly sense, this stinks.
Yeah, right.
What am I going to do? But like, did it mean that, am I that attached to it? Like, am I going to sit here and cry about it? Or am I just going to let God show me what he's doing? Because he does.
Yeah.
He does.
But I think part of the thing that we need to understand is it's not going to embed in our heart until we experience it. Mm-hmm. So to your point, like when we have a perspective shift in the middle of going through a hard season, even especially financially, of like, hey, our only choice here is just to depend on the Lord.
Yeah.
And cry out to him and pray. And then when he does do what he does, then we have, it's like we can tell somebody all day long something, but until you experience it and experience the provision of God, it really doesn't shift your heart.
Yeah, it doesn't. And so all of this reminds me, again, I'm very self-sharing here about myself clearly, but it points back to the fact of God reminding you, saying, okay, all these things belong to me. It makes me think, again, of 1 Timothy 6:18-9, where Paul's telling the believers to do good and to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. That's your house, that's your family, that's everything. So he reminds us that through generosity and selfless giving, we are laying up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age so that they may take hold of the life that is truly their truly life. And so that makes me think about all these things are here, but when I do with them what God's asking me to do, when I'm generous, when I'm giving to my church, when I'm opening up my doors, and sometimes I don't want to open the doors. I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes my house is dirty. Sometimes I'm in a bad mood. Okay, I'm not saying that this just always flows so nice. I'm human too. Sometimes I'm having a bad day, right?
Yeah.
But when I have this mindset, then what I don't realize or what I'm not thinking about all the time is that those things God rewards. And I might not see it here. I'm not saying he's going to dump some gold on my front porch because I opened my doors to the church.
Yeah.
But Paul's message is saying, hey, see the abundance and the opportunities you have now with internal treasures and external treasures and where they go. What are you going to do with them? Instead of hoarding all this, let's trust in an internal significance and not in a temporary security.
Yeah, I mean, so you're exactly right. I mean, the Bible talks about that we actually store up for ourselves treasures in heaven.
Yep.
Right? And it's okay. Like in some ways you're like, well, that's in itself seems a little greedy. Like I'm storing up some things I'm being selfish about, but it's more of an eternal mindset. Yeah. Right? And
it's where I might live here for 80 years, but I'm going to spend my eternity.
Right.
And I know the Bible has a lot of different elements of writing. And so to even say treasure, and people go, well, boy, what are you trying to save all your money from there? He doesn't explain what treasure is.
Right.
He doesn't say it's a pound of
This is
gold
what it
and
looks like.
$50 million, right?
Right.
The treasure could just be that I get to sit at the feet of Jesus.
Exactly.
And he says, good and faithful, well done, my servant. And I'm just like, yes, Lord.
Right. Right.
That could be the treasure. Or the treasure could just be that I spend my presence with him and dwell the rest of my days with him. That could be the treasure.
Right.
I mean, I can't lose either way, Christian.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it great?
I can't lose either way. So as I was developing all this, I've said it in almost every episode, the word idol kept coming up. That I don't really look at things like money or work or any of the other topics we've had as an idol. But God really laid it on my heart that anything above him is an idol. That includes money.
Yeah.
So
that's exactly right.
I have another really great book here, y'all. Today I had lots of books I wanted to share. I don't know if you've ever read Margin.
No, I haven't.
This book is great. Baylor is a book on Baylor's to read. Such a good book. So Richard, he's a doctor. He's an MD. And so he has a unique perspective of how he discusses these different things like emotional, physical, and financial health, right? Because he's actually pulling in health as well as your physical health and what happens. So he states that wealth is not the primary objective of the spiritual life. We're hearing it again. And he says, when we encounter money along the way, we are encouraged to do one or three things with it. And you're going to love these. Number one, turn and walk in the other direction. That's number one. And I started thinking, I don't know anybody that's ever done that. Okay, let's go number two. Pick it up and give it away. And I thought, well, there are some people who do that well. I would not say everybody.
Right.
And then it said, or use it for the necessities of daily living. And he says, any other choice leads to adverse spiritual consequences, thus the issues with idolatry and money.
Yeah. The Bible says that God will supply our needs, right? It doesn't say he's going to supply all the things we're dreaming up in our head and what we think we need.
Yeah.
Right? Those are
I'm
actually...
not getting that house in Colorado,
Yeah,
am
exactly. No, but I need it. You know?
I do. I need it badly.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it plays out even in my own life of like, so my wife is she's a CPA, and so she, from the very beginning part of our marriage. Wait a minute,
your wife's a CPA? I
Yeah.
didn't know that. So,
yeah, which is interesting,
so
right?
So really, you guys should be like the gurus.
You would think.
Of money.
You would think. No, but she did this analysis of kind of the cash flow, a yearly cash flow estimation. So this is how much of a nerd she is, right? But I love it. She's like, hey, there's going to be a season in our lives for about 3 to 4 years where it's the biggest outflow cash-wise that we're ever going to have in our entire lives.
Wow.
And we are literally right in the middle of it right now.
Wow.
Yeah, because we've... one of my daughters is getting married. One of them is in college. One of them's about to start
Your
driving.
money has wings.
Yeah.
It's flying.
And what's interesting about it is her and I, we've always been, to your point, like we know, growing up in the church, it's the tithe, right? So we've always, from the very beginning of our marriage, because she works for herself, what happened to us, and really it's because we didn't even keep a good focus on it, was she only gets paid when she invoices her clients.
Right.
And so there's not a steady stream. Well, we kind of got lax in making sure every time she invoices that we're setting apart some of that.
Right.
And we got a little bit lax on it, and we finally came to the realization of it a couple years ago, right in the middle of this cash flow thing that we're talking about, right? Like,
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, we've got into this situation where we're not actually doing everything that we want to and our hearts do. And we just committed to it. So it doesn't matter. We're going to do it.
Yeah.
And for a CPA to just say, you know what? Yeah, this is what's right. We got to give to God first, regardless of where we are in our personal finances.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. And it's amazing to watch that God's still paying the bills. God's still making sure everything's, yeah, exactly. And it is part of our own personal testimony of like, yeah, we didn't necessarily overtly get ourselves into that situation. But for all of us, I think it's really a realization of like when God plants something in your heart.
Amen.
Right? You have a choice. You can either be obedient or disobedient. And so that's for all of us is like when the Holy Spirit nudges us, like, that's God communicating to you.
Yep.
Like, hey, this is something that I'm planting a seed in your heart. And so what you do with it is, we talk about our part, their part, God's part. Like we have a part to play in our own generosity story.
Yep. So there was a article I was reading, I think it's Christian Minimalism is the name, and it talks about money being an idol, and it shifts it to lottery winners, right? Because winning the lottery to people is a huge gift.
Right.
Like, especially when you have these like that are going on now, it's in the billions, right? And everybody's trying to buy a lottery ticket. But it says that historically and statistically, it almost ends in a nightmare for everybody who gets that type of money. And it says if you get on the internet or you go look at records from people's names, like story after story after story of these lottery winners, it tells of how it ruined their lives and how this windfall just happened. And it turns out that they're really not any more happier.
Exactly right.
They're actually less happy. So we buy into this thought that here's this thing, this money thing on the table, here's this idol, and it's going to do all this amazing stuff. It's going to change my life. I'm going to live like the Kardashians, right? But it's not the case.
No.
It's not the case. And there's also been some studies done to test the correlation between happiness and wealth. Imagine that. So this one study that came out said that more money only brings more happiness to a certain point. And then once your needs are met, it sounds familiar, and you maybe have a little extra for fun, then having more money does not equate to happiness because you're still chasing for more money.
Yeah.
You still don't think you're happy. So like all the things you think, if I have this, then I'll be happy.
Yeah.
And then you obtain that and you're not happy.
Yeah. Ecclesiastes 5:10 says, those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness.
I mean, didn't he cover it all? I mean, if we opened our Bible, it just was like, does money make happiness?
Yeah.
Oh, look, he mentions it right here.
I mean, that's like a complete, I love the Bible, man. It will slap you across the face.
It will.
Right?
It'll really grab a hold of you tightly.
Yeah.
So this pursuit of wealth doesn't just impact our priorities. It impacts our hearts. We've said that time after time. So when money takes a center stage, it begins to compete with God for our devotion, creating a divide in our relationship with Him. So wealth, when elevated above its rightful place, which in case you guys don't know, that's above God, dulls our dependence on God and shifts our trust to temporary things, pulling us away from those eternal treasures that God has for us.
Right.
And this affects our relationship with God.
Yeah, going back to the story or the passage in 2 Corinthians, there's a lot of principles about generosity that talks about exactly what you're talking about is when we can begin to view when we giving to the Lord is a heart's response. It's actually an act of worship back to the Lord. And when you look at that passage, it says the Macedonian church, even though they gave out of their poverty, he says they were they had abundant joy and it overflowed from them. And you can think, wow, so you're already extremely poor.
Yeah.
And yet you give and you actually have more joy in your heart.
Right.
And that is the key is how do we find joy in giving?
Yeah.
Like, can we truly be generous and actually find joy in it? Because God doesn't want us to give and then be miserable or give out of obligation or give even to meet a standard like the tithe.
Yeah.
He wants us to actually do what's called grace giving. I heard somebody say this. I tell you what, why don't you just give in relation to what you think Christ has done for you in your life?
So we need to pack up my house, Christian. I'm going to give you some boxes.
Right.
And we're going to wrap everything up and return to sender.
Right. Again, one of those kind of punches in the face of like,
Wow.
That's what grace giving is. Of like, can I give out of what Christ has done for me? Right.
And it's so cliche because people are like, you can't outgive God. Well, you can't.
Yeah.
That's why people say it,
Yeah.
because people who say that, I've often noticed, have a testimony that goes with it. That I was here, I didn't have nothing. It was but God.
Yeah.
I mean, time after time. And I've seen in my own self, like even 8 years of tithing, even seeing God. I mean, I have a stone of remembrance for money like a mile long because that's money is my biggest distraction. And it's not a wealth distraction. It's more like, oh my gosh, is it going to be enough? Scarcity. So I'm in that scarcity camp that I'm always worried that because we have so many kids and my husband travels, like you go to the emergency room one time and he'll wipe you out.
No doubt.
You know what I mean? So
No
try
doubt.
that times 5, right? But we've had seasons like that where it was just one thing after another thing. And I would sit there and think, oh my gosh, like we paid for it, but like, what if something else happens? And, maybe Jeremy will get a raise maybe Jeremy will get a raise, or maybe, maybe this thing over here that's been in the working for a while that, we're supposed to be, resolving, maybe that'll happen. He shows me that he can take care of it.
Sure.
But later when he knows I really can't take care of something bigger's coming, or something that he wants me to do.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden those things fall into place.
That's really good.
And I have seen it over the last 3 years more than I've ever seen it ever, where I can't see it. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's like, I'm nervous. I'm trying not to depend on my husband's job. I'm trying not to depend on this wishy-washy thing over here. I'm solely saying, Lord, I want to rely on you. I want to know that you are the one who is my provider. The money might funnel through this organization, but it's because you've put us here and you knew we needed this to meet our needs. So I need to depend on you.
That's really good.
And
wow.
Tim Keller, let's see, I have another book here. Look, I am booked out today.
Good for you.
Tim Keller, Counterfeit Gods, another great book.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Along with that one, we're just dropping
just
things
making all
today.
kind of sounds
yeah,
today.
we don't care. This is what happens. We don't care. Ty will get you every time. Tim Keller identifies things people often do with idols, like wealth. Okay, so this is another one of those lists. So he says they either love them, they trust them, he says there's three things they do, They love them, they trust them, and they obey them. And he says lovers of money find themselves daydreaming about new ways to make money, fantasize about possessions.
That's right.
And then envying everybody around them who has money. Trusters of money feel safe and in control of their lives because of their wealth, believing it gives them security. So that's the people who say, okay, if I have X number in the bank, I'm fine. I don't have to worry about it. I'm not going to get these surprises. I'm not, if a bill comes up, not a problem. I'm not going to be broke. And then obeyers of money shape their decisions and lives around acquiring and keeping it, and it lets them dictate their priorities.
That's really good.
And so he goes on to say that we sell our souls to our idols.
Wow.
And this is because we look to them for our significance, our love, and our security, which is our trust.
Yep.
And we have to have them. And therefore, we are driven to serve them and to be distracted by them, and then ultimately to obey them.
That's solid. That's solid, because it leads us down a slippery slope. Right?
Oh, it's huge. Yeah.
And I think there's also an element of like, the way that we can begin to untether our hearts to our money and that idol of money is things like, one of the things that God talks about in his word is this idea of sacrifice. Like when we give, it's one thing to give where we don't feel it. Like, I can give.
Yeah.
I'm going to give to a point where it's comfortable. But when we can begin giving and we feel it and it becomes a sacrifice to us, it really helps us shift our mindset and our idolship away. David talks about that in 2 Samuel. He was the king. He had a ton of money, and long story short, there was a threshing floor that he wanted to buy, and because the death angel was coming, and through prayer, it stopped at this threshing hold, and he's like, "I'm going to buy that and make an altar to the Lord." And the guy that owned it was like, "No, I'm just going to give it to you. You just take it." And he's like, "No." And he made this statement. He says, "I will not present offerings to my God that cost me nothing." And I think it's this idea of I'm going to sacrifice I'm going to put what I view as an idol on the altar, and I'm going to sacrifice it there. That's really the only, and it can be money, it can be our time. We can covet our time just as much as our money. Whatever it is, are you willing to sacrifice it and actually say, I'm going to give to the point where it actually costs me something, like King David did?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's a saying, if you feel like you don't have to work for it, then you don't appreciate it.
Yeah.
I mean, like it has to cost you. I think in anything you tell somebody to earn something or get something, for them to really appreciate it, they have to have done something for it, because then it means something to you.
Exactly.
It becomes a part of you. And then, of course, wealth can harden our hearts towards others. So excess focus on money often leads to greed and selfishness and ignoring those in need. A good example of this in the Bible is the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man's wealth blinded him to see the suffering that was around him. And so as I was thinking about this, I was like, when we prioritize wealth, it pulls us away from our call to love other people, because I'm just so distracted by what I can do, how I can be self-serving for self.
Yeah.
So if I have money, then I can take care of my family. I can take care of my needs. I can take care of my desires. And I just hear the devil all over that, because I hear a lot of me, I, right?
Right.
And it makes me think about, in the class I'm taking right now, I had to take the story of the woman and the pennies. It's not pennies in the Bible. It's a different the mites, right? But I think it equals like a penny or something. It makes me think about how that story really gets caught up about it being about her being a giver. But after researching that story in my class, what really happened was great, right? She only has 2 coins, and it says she gave all she had, meaning like there was no more. It wasn't like she was going to go down the street and grab something else. So she had a great act of faith. She had a great trust in God, but it was completely unnoticed by others, right? But the thing that got me was the religious leaders. That's what stuck out to me, is that the religious leaders were so...
Their hearts were hardened, right? Yeah.
They were so consumed by their robes and hearing, like, look at us, look at how they're coming, and throwing it into these shaped things that make it echo. The bigger the money, the more, like, the louder the sound. So we know you gave. And so when she throws hers in, she's not noticed by them. If their heart posture would have been correct, they would have seen, oh my, here's a widow who has nothing left. How are we going to serve her? How are we going to help her? We have the means. Look at our fancy clothes and look at all the money coming into the pot. But it was like no.
Yeah.
That's all you gave. That's all you got. And so that when I did that, it really got me that we have to lead by example.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't be focused on self.
When the only time Jesus mentions the idea of giving 10%, he's talking to the Pharisees in the New Testament, and he says, you bring 10% of your spices and your things, but you neglect the greater work of justice and mercy. And it talks about this idea of where's your heart posture? Yeah. Like you're giving because you're trying to meet a standard and be good with the Lord, and yet your heart is so far away from the Lord.
Yeah.
There's no amount of giving that's going to get your heart right with God unless you give that idol away to Him.
Yeah. And put it back in its place.
Right.
So, like, for me, that story with her challenges me, and I would hope it would challenge others to examine, like you said, your heart. Are we like the teachers of the law? Maybe not all the time, but are we sometimes? When the church or your neighbor or someone who's outside of your major friend group needs something, do we turn from that? Somebody else will take care of it. That's for that organization. That's what they're in place for.
Yeah.
Jesus' call in Matthew 22:39, love your neighbor as yourself. It reminds us that true faith is not about how much we have, but about how much we love.
That's good.
And it doesn't mean loving our money. It means loving people. And as well as I do, love often equates and requires sacrifice.
Yep.
Love in a marriage, sacrifice. Love with children,
That's what we talked about, right?
Yeah. You want to keep going? Working in ministry, loving people in ministry, sacrifice.
Right.
It's the same thing with our money. To love others well.
Are you willing to sacrifice?
Are we willing to sacrifice?
Yeah.
And so that just goes back to a reminder that love itself isn't evil. right? It's a tool. It's something that we all use to navigate life. But the love of money is where things get a little topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
And again, I want to just give you this verse again, that 1 Timothy 6:10 tells us, for the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It's not evil. It's the root that gets into your heart.
When you look at the structure of that sentence, it says the love is what's evil.
Yes.
The desire for money is what's evil. Money is not necessarily evil. It's a means to an end, right?
Yep.
It's the love. It's the heart posture. I mean, even that verse, when you break it down, that's exactly what it's saying.
Yep.
Right?
And so that takes us to application, because week after week, I tell people there's nothing more frustrating than hearing all this and going, okay, I can get on board with this. Maybe I haven't heard it that way. Maybe I haven't thought it that way. But then they walk away and go, but how do I do it?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
So for me, I think that you have to understand God's provision. And this is the easiest way. If anybody who knows me really well knows that I say this, God's math doesn't math. 2 + 2 does not equal 4.
Yeah.
Let's talk about loaves and fish. Okay. I think you have to understand that we have to trust God as the ultimate provider. Right.
Yeah.
And so if we trust him as the ultimate provider and we shift our focus back to him, then acquiring wealth and stewardship just kind of falls down the line.
Yeah.
That's my thought anyway.
Building storehouses, right?
Yes.
Like that's exactly. And I think when it comes to application, I think there's a few things. First of all, I would say, first and foremost, like we have to understand the biblical principle here on generosity is it has nothing to do with the amount that you're giving, right? We see that over and over. Like we think, oh, well, I got to give a certain amount or a certain percentage or whatever. And really, when you look at even, the passages that we've read is, it has nothing to do with the amount.
No.
And so we need to get over this idea of there's some sort of a standard or amount of money that I have to give for me to live a generous life. And that's not it. I mean, look at the widow that had the mites.
Yeah.
It's not about the amount, right? And so I think the question really is where do we find contentment? Because really, if we can be content, we can be generous.
Yeah.
Right? If we can be content with what we have and the amount of money that we make, we can begin to get generous with what we do with our money. And so I think contentment is a really, really big issue in our society today. And that's something that society tells us is, hey, you never have enough. You always need more. Look at this fancy object. Don't you want it? Don't you desire it?
And they do a great job at it.
Right. So I think really, can I find contentment in where I'm at in financially in my life? And that, I think that's the big start. And I think we have to do our own work in that with the Lord of,
yes,
do I have an uncontent heart right now?
Yeah.
Oh,
and he'll let you know.
Yeah.
He's really good at that.
Yeah, right.
But I think you have to be open, right? You can't go to that and be like, does this check a box? Because when you do the check a box, again, you're not attached to that. You're just making sure you're securing something somewhere.
Yeah.
God knows your heart. When you go to him with a check a box, he knows that you're just there for a check a box.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you, he's going to do some things with you to get that check a box mentality broken down to where he really can zone in and get you and get your attention.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience. Maybe I'm the only one.
No, 100%.
And you mentioned in your notes that there's been studies done, right? Between gratitude and generosity.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a neuroscientist, I can't remember exactly, I think out of California, and talked about the science behind generosity and being grateful. And the more that we can appreciate what we have and be grateful for what we have, we're naturally a more generous people, which is weird. It's like this brain science thing of if we can build gratitude in our hearts and our minds, the natural overflow of that is you become more generous.
Wow.
Right. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it, right? When I can be happy and content and be thankful for, Lord, thank you for the provision you've given me. Because from that posture, then I can say, how can I not give back to what you've first given me?
Yeah, that's good.
Right? It's like everything that I have is yours. You've blessed me with where I am. You've blessed me that I have a roof over my head, that I can provide for my family, these are all such blessings that I think we take for granted. And we can begin to view things and be grateful for it. So one of the best ways to really take practical steps to get more generous is to start a gratitude journal.
Oh, that's good.
Is actually every day get up and write 3 things that you're grateful that the Lord provided for you. And then actually begin to pray over, how do I take that gratefulness in my heart and actually turn it to how do I live a more generous life? And I like to talk about a generous life. Yes, finances, but there's so many other ways to be generous with your life.
Yeah. Especially if you live in Houston, Texas.
Yeah.
But it's everywhere. I say that as a joke just because there's so many people and we hear so much about the things happening here. But that's no matter where you are in this moment. There is someone, it could be your neighbor, it could be somebody at church, it could be somebody you just bump into today too, that God says, you hear that little voice and says them.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, are you hearing that? Are you open to hearing that? Is your heart in a posture that's willing to let God say them and you don't know them?
Exactly.
But you just trust that that's what he's telling you to do and you go do it.
And then that's the thing where it's like, okay, you have a choice to be obedient or disobedient in that moment. Yeah. Right.
Let's, here's a hint, go with obedient. And then lastly, you had a thought about application, the eternal perspective.
Yeah. And that, to me, that's a big one, that if we can make sure, and this is again, going back to the treasure principle passage or book, is the mindset and the perspective we have of wealth, right? When we give to the Lord's work in whatever capacity that looks like, and we just in faith say, Lord, you're going to do more with this than I could ever do. And we realize that it has a much bigger impact in God's kingdom than in my bank account.
That's good.
Right? Like it has so much more. And A.W. Tozer has such an amazing quote, and I want to read this. It says this, it says, as base a thing as money often is, it yet can be transmuted into everlasting treasure. It can be converted into food for the hungry and clothing for the poor. It can keep a missionary actively winning lost men to the light of the gospel and thus transmute itself into heavenly values. Any temporal possession can be turned into everlasting wealth. And I love this. He ends with this. He says, whatever is given to Christ is immediately touched with immortality. And that is such an amazing perspective of like, hey, when I give to the Lord, man, God does so much more in his economy than I could ever do. So when you talk about investment, I can put something into my 401k account and I can watch an investment account grow.
Right.
Or I can give it in God's kingdom and watch him not just multiply it, but exponentially use it to grow his kingdom.
That same thought process is in margin. He just says it differently. He was like, here's the deal. You're going to lose your money one way or another.
Yeah, you're not taking it with you.
Either you're going to lose it by death, which is inevitable, or you can lose it in a sense to where you watch it go on and send it ahead of you. And I love that. I've never thought of it about that way. Send it ahead. And that's the same principle. My money's going into something else. It's going to go into something else, and it's going to continue.
And it can pay dividends over and over and over again. Yeah. Yeah, just like you said, when you give to support a missionary and somebody's life is won to Christ, when then that person then leads someone to Christ, and then it grows, and it all came from a seed of generosity that you gave. That's eternal impact when it just continues to go over. It's almost like a in the temporal world, like a trust fund or an endowment, right? It perpetuates itself over and over and over again,
Who else can do that but God?
Yeah.
Who else? Nobody else can do that.
Right.
So here's what we've been doing, Christian. At the end of our episodes, we've been given like a refocus challenge. And the thought is that when we tell people to stop doing something, it makes them want to do it more. Like when I tell my kids, stop hitting your brother, like all of a sudden we have a full wrestling match, right?
That's good.
So we want to refocus. We want to say like, instead of this or instead of that, or, let's think this way or let's look at it this way. So here's just some things that I came up with that I thought would be good. So this week, let's take a moment to evaluate where your heart is and what it's like, what you think about when you think about money and possessions. So first and foremost, let's ask ourselves this week, where does my time and energy go? Am I spending more time worrying about my finances than trusting God to provide? Well, if so, let's make a list of some of those things. This is something I've done for the past several years. At the beginning of the year, I write down all the things that we need to do that are a little bit above, right? Like it can be a lot of times house things or kid things, or maybe I'd like to do a vacation, but I know that I really maybe not have all of it, or that I don't want to use it all in that way. So I write it down and I start praying about them.
That's good.
And I ask God that, are these things that are a priority? Do these things really need to take care of? Now, clearly, if like your toilet's overflowing, you need to go take care of that, right? But I'm talking about things that don't have to be done, but I would just like. So like one year we had old bedroom furniture. It was like falling apart, right? And our room was the only room that if you walked into, you'd think you were in the 80s. and so for like 2 years, I just prayed like, Lord, I really want to have new bedroom furniture. I really want our room to be a place of like, it's a retreat for us after our day. And sure enough, like 2 years later, we had something happen and we got some money from something. It was overtime, something we weren't expecting. Yeah. And like the prompting was like, now. Yeah,
now's the time. Yeah.
And it goes back to that thought about pray for everything. Yeah. There's nothing too small to pray about, right?
Yeah, that's really good.
And then ask yourself, what do you treasure the most? So like look at your spending.
Your bank account will tell you, right, what you're treasuring.
I think that's part of the problem. We have online banking now, so you can't see all that. Like when you used to have paper, you could see it all right there. So like, what are your spending habits? What are your saving habits? Do they reflect God's priorities? Yeah. Or are they more worldly? Again, I'm not saying going to Starbucks 8 times is a bad thing, right? But if you're saying, I can't do this extra because I don't have it, well, are there some things that maybe you could shift or do differently? Again, that might not be everybody. Some people may be just being able to pay their rent, buy their groceries, get gas, and take their kids to school. That might be all you're at right now. Yeah. And that's okay. That's clearly okay. But we can still pray about how God can shift and turn that around, or how he can make space to do something.
Yeah. I think it really, what you're focusing in on is, Lord, convict me where I need to be convicted.
Yeah.
Because he's going to convict us all differently. But am I open to that spirit nudge of like, hey, you need to shift here. You need to change here. And that's the conviction of the Holy Spirit that we all just have to be open to. And it's all different. It's different for all of us.
It is. And then here's 3 little things that, I didn't want to push it. But for some of you overachievers, maybe after you pray and look and think, maybe you go, okay, well, I see God moving. So then what can I do? Right? Like, I don't know where to start. So here's one. How about the generosity step? Find one way to give this week, whether it's your time, your resources, or just encouragement. Acts of generosity break the grip of money's hold and then aligns our heart with God. Yeah. So again, nobody's asking you to open your wallet. But what can you give this week? How can you have a heart posture that's a giving posture?
Being rich in generosity, like the Bible says, right?
Yeah. And here's the one where they're going to turn it off. The tithe test. If you're not already tithing, take a leap of faith and shoot for 10%. But if you can't, start at 2%.
Yeah.
Start at 1%. Yeah. Like, look at it. What can you do just to get your feet wet, right? It's a tangible way to start trusting God as your provider and loosen the grip that money has over you.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And it goes back to the beginning where what you said, Jeremy, was kind of dropping the truth bombs on you.
Man.
I think a lot of people have this misconception of, well, if I can't give 10%, then... But it's like, everybody needs to start somewhere. Yeah. And maybe they've never given... in their lives. Your first step is just to put your foot in the water.
I remember one sermon, sorry to cut you off,
okay.
But it just came to me where you stood up and you were talking about one of those issues where people have with the church. Like, if I give you my money, what are you doing with it? And you were like, it's really not your business, because God's going to deal with us. Yeah. Like, you have to trust that we are in line with what God's doing. And if we're not, then God's going to course correct, or he's going to deal with us. Like, you don't have to go home tonight and worry where your 10% went.
Yeah.
And that we jacked it up.
Yeah. You're talking about when the first church in Acts, where, that says that they had everything in common. And it said they came and they sold their possessions and they put it at the feet of the disciples,
Yep.
And so they trusted them with whatever it was. And you're exactly right. There's a weight as a pastor, God puts a weight on our shoulders to be accountable for what his flock is giving.
Yeah.
And if it's misappropriated, it's on us.
Yeah.
You
guys don't have to be at home worrying about it.
You've done your part. You're getting the blessing of that.
Right.
You're storing up treasures in heaven, right? It's on us to make sure. So is there trust, right? And maybe that's a practical step of praying of like, how much do I actually trust the leadership of my church?
Right. Yeah.
To do what they're going to do.
And giving up that control. It's not your place. It's not our place to be the hand slapper. Now, clearly, if a church is out of line, you go to your elders or whatever.
Right.
But if that's what the tool the devil's using to pull your string, then it's time to cut that string. Because it's not, God will do far more to deal with that than what you can ever do.
That's right.
Ever.
Yeah.
And he will correct it. I promise you he will. Okay, so here's just some quick takeaways before we end today. So we hope that you see that money is a tool, not a master.
That's right.
There is a huge distraction when it comes to wealth and things of money, right? This is about a heart posture. This is not about your balance in your check in your account. We hope today we gave you some really good biblical perspectives on money and how Scripture offers guidance and shows us, just like Christian said, it is not a rule book here, right? It's an overarching theme and thought about us being internally okay and not externally okay. Refocusing on our internal treasures, external and internal today. I just can't get it right.
Yeah.
Refocusing on our eternal treasures, right? So God calls us to store up those treasures in heaven by putting his kingdom first. And then we gave you some practical steps for realignment. And lastly, I think the biggest part of all this conversation is where I found that my heart needed the most work, which was just trusting God that he would be my provider, and that true security doesn't come from the wealth of the world, doesn't come from my husband's work. It doesn't come from an inheritance over here or whatever. It comes from truly believing that God will be faithful to meet our needs.
Amen.
And I think for me, that's still a lesson that I have to learn.
Right.
I have to learn daily, but I do think it's a lesson that we all could use a little more schooling in.
Yeah, exactly right.
All right, any last thoughts, Christian?
No, I think you summed it up amazing, and I just appreciate the conversation. And it's such an interesting topic to talk about. It
is an interesting topic, and like I said, it's a topic that makes people uncomfortable. But I hope today it's just given perspective, because that's what it's about. It's about us teaching each other, us leaning on each other, hearing it from maybe a different point of view.
Right.
Money doesn't have to be a bad taboo topic. It doesn't have to be the elephant in the room. If anything, it should be the biggest piece of saying, what is God doing with you and through you to help in the lives of others?
That's exactly right.
And it should be an exciting topic, something that we can't wait to share how God is showing how he moves. And if we could ever get to that place, could you imagine? Could you imagine? Because I can't.
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's a work in progress, right?
Yeah, we're all works in progress.
All works in progress. Thank you for coming today and taking the time to step away from your normal responsibilities and spending time with us. We are just honored to have you. And I knew you were the man for this job.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thanks, Christian. All right, guys, we will see you in the upcoming week with our next topic from Driven to Distraction. Bye, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to Southern Soul Chats. We know that money can be an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but it's such an important one because it reveals much about where our hearts truly stand with God. We hope today's episode, Checking Your Balance, encouraged you to reflect on how money influences your heart and your relationship with God. Don't forget about this week's Focus Challenge. Take time this week to evaluate where your treasure truly lies and ask God to help you align your priorities with his kingdom. If this episode challenged or inspired you, remember to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. We'd love to connect with you on Instagram and Facebook. Come share how this week's challenge is helping you to grow. We're passionate about equipping and empowering others to deepen their relationship with Christ, and we would be honored if you'd consider partnering with us. You can support our ministry through donations on our website at www.steppingforward.org. And don't forget to come back in 2 weeks as we continue our Driven to Distraction series with another impactful conversation. Until then, keep your focus on Him, and may His peace keep you stepping forward. Bye, y'all.